A major fire in a labor camp in Mangaf, Kuwait, claimed the lives of 42 Indians. Over 50 people have been hospitalized due to injuries sustained in the fire. The incident took place in a 6-story building where these workers were sleeping. Now, this devastating fire is a stark reminder of the dire living conditions faced by Indian laborers in the Gulf. Now, there's a great demand for unskilled labor in the Middle East. The earnings are significantly higher than that at home, so many laborers don't mind going there. But they often work in living conditions that are harsh. They live in cramped rooms, semi-constructed buildings, or in labor camps. Now, this building in Kuwait was one such building. After this tragedy, will the conditions of Indian labor improve? To talk about this, I have with me Ambassador K.P. Fabian. He served in the Middle East. Dr. Zakir Hussain, foreign policy analyst, and my colleague Krishna Kumar here in the studio with me. Krishna, start by breaking this down for us. How bad was this tragedy when it compares to other such incidents that we have heard of in recent years?
Right. The most unfortunate thing I can think of when it comes to this particular tragedy is that those who died, that is 40 odd Indians,
yes.
They died not because of the fire, most of them died because of the inhalation of the smoke.
Yes.
And that is the most unfortunate thing. And how did that happen? This incident took place at around 6 a.m. in the morning in
yes.
Kuwait. And most of these who passed away, who were killed in this tragedy, were those who finished their night shift
yes.
and had just come back home or come back to their dormitories,
right.
come back to their living quarters to sleep.
Yes.
And even as they were asleep, the smoke engulfed them. There was a power cut because of which people did not know which way to go. In fact, there's also a report of somebody trying to jump down from the building from the 5th
right.
story or the 4th
right.
story and dying in that process as well. So this is a tragedy that really it's gut-wrenching the way it all panned out. And you're talking about workers from India, where there are about 9 lakh of them who
yes.
are in Kuwait alone. They form 30% of the
yes.
workforce of Kuwait. And in fact, Indians themselves contribute about 20%, 21% of Kuwait's population. That's around
right.
10 lakh or 1 million. So this is, if you ask me, just the tip of the iceberg, because again, let's face it, the bad quality of living quarters
yes.
of Indian workers in the Gulf is not just restricted to Kuwait, but across the Middle East.
It is,
Sandeep.
absolutely. And speaking of icebergs in the desert, but let's talk to someone, Krishna, who's actually seen the entire iceberg, if you can call it that, in the Middle East. That's Ambassador Fabian. Ambassador Fabian, over 80 lakh Indians in the Gulf. As Krishna was mentioning, many of them live in subhuman conditions, labor camps, cramped, filthy, 40 to a room, possibly dormitories. They live in and work in the most inhuman conditions. Of course, they paid for it, but then at the end of the day, you have to ask if it's worth your life, if it's worth your family's future, these kind of living conditions. How often have these come up in your discussions with the Gulf states? Ambassador Fabian.
Well, anyway, I was there a long time ago. I started my stint in the West Asia region in 1976. I was Joint Secretary Gulf at the time of the evacuation, big evacuation, and
yes.
later Ambassador in Doha. Now the thing is this, the conditions of our workers need improvement, and
yes.
we had, at the embassy level, we used to take it up
right.
with the ministry, and but I should say that we have not, we meaning the labor exporting countries,
right.
have not jointly taken up this matter, and in my opinion, it is wrong to say that the labor exporting countries are competing with each other and therefore they cannot take joint action in this regard. But
right.
just a point of clarification. At 4:30, the fire extinguisher reached the place. So
yes.
it is not at 6 a.m. Apparently it happened around 3 a.m. And I want to ask you a question, and this is a question to the media. When did the Indian media come to know of it?
When did the Indian media come to know of it?
It was quite late.
Yes.
That's the point that Ambassador Fabian is trying to make, because the tragedy struck at 6 a.m. Kuwait time.
Yes.
By the time it hit the Indian media, it was much later in the afternoon. When we could understand the fact that this tragedy has happened. And even then, the details were sketchy. For example, the first media reports in India said that just about 4 Indians have been killed.
Yes.
And in a matter of an hour or so, that number went up from 4 to 40. Wasn't that the case, Ambassador Fabian?
Well, there is also another question. Our ambassador met the commerce minister before he went to the site. Obviously, if he had known about it, he wouldn't have met the commerce minister. He would have postponed that meeting.
Right.
In other words, I want to find out, when did the embassy come to know of it?
Yes, absolutely.
And here I want to make a point.
Yes.
An embassy should be working 24/7.
Yes.
And I went to the website of our embassy, and it said that the labor section will be working from Sunday to Thursday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Right.
Now,
right.
not good enough.
Right.
In my time in Doha, I used to make sure that any maid who rushed to the embassy at any time,
Yes.
24/7, she could meet with an official who spoke her mother tongue within half an hour.
Right.
So the embassies have to pull up their socks.
Absolutely. Embassies have to pull up their socks, especially given the fact that there are so many Indians there, and the embassies are the first port of call for any Indian that's in distress, as Ambassador Fabian mentioned. But Dr. Zakir Hussain, this other point that Ambassador Fabian mentioned, that what are the rights of labor exporting countries in situations like this? When you know of the fact that you have Indians working in subhuman conditions, there have been cases in the past as well in Qatar, when Qatar was building all those glitzy facilities for the Football World Cup. There were questions asked where people were dying because of the extreme heat conditions. What are the rights really of labor exporting countries in situations like this? How can we force change?
ILO has given a detailed program and rights mentioning the migrant workers, but very few countries follow this. Even the sending countries do not follow. They have all human rights which are given them: right to protection, right to safeguard during distress period, and all sorts of things which we provide to our labor in domestic market are there. Even compensation is also there. But to our understanding that neither the receiving country nor host country nor the sending countries abide by them. And even it is surprising that when they sign the manpower agreement with individual countries, they mention all these things, but they don't put into practice, except few countries like Philippines, which are very dedicated towards this labor.
Right.
And they have appointed a separate attaché to look after all these things. And this is a very surprising thing that in Gulf, more than 9 million people, that is around 35% of the total GCC countries, labor are going to India. But we don't have labor attaches in all these countries. And this is very sorry. During my interaction, when I was in ILO, I interacted a lot, and I come from a region where migrant labor are heavily going to Gulf. They said that when we go to complain to the embassy, they say there only one question answer they give, that you are here to work, not to complain. This is very surprising and very pathetic situation of the embassy. And I totally think that the Ministry of Labor and embassies are responsible for this, and it is very good step. For the first time, perhaps the junior minister, foreign minister, has been set immediately there. Though Ambassador Fabian is right, he should have visited to the building. And it is also we also know the fact that the contractors, all these people are very corrupt and complicit with the people there. The interior minister, who is also the deputy prime minister of Kuwait, immediately gave a statement that the greed of the contractor and building owner are responsible for this. And he has given a very strong step to take all these things. But what I feel that this must be from our side. Why government of India is not taking cognizance of these events, which is not a new thing. Even in Kuwait, in 2022, 4 Indians died in a refinery fire before this. And Kuwait has a very high temperature of and automatically fire burns everywhere. But we have not
Yes.
taken this issue. And I have been interacting. I have written a lot on this. The laborers are not, especially the blue collars, are not contracted by the government, by the embassies, whether they are left on the mercy of employers. That is, kafils. Kafala system is very
Yes.
exploitative. We think that this is a high time that the government should take cognizance of these things and revise the labor, especially the protection of the laborers. And I'm also happy that government has announced that 200,000 rupee ex gratia to
Yes.
the
Yes.
who died. This
Yeah.
is for the first time perhaps announced. So these a lot of measures are required because they are sending around 35 billion remittances to India
Absolutely. It's
on
one of the
account.
largest, it's literally
Yeah,
50% of our overseas remittances come from the
coming
GCC
from.
countries. But Ambassador
Yeah.
Fabian, how can we ensure that, it's such a tragedy, 42 Indians dying in the most, pitiable conditions that we can imagine, died in their sleep. They possibly, went through enormous pain and suffering in their final moments. How can we make sure something positive comes out of this? As Dr. Zakir Hussain mentioned, yes, compensation, that's one thing, that's immediate. How can you make sure that all those millions of other Indians who are working there in the Gulf never have to face a situation like this? Labor attaches is one thing. We heard of defense attaches being posted in foreign embassies to push Indian trade, but how can the government make sure that something like labor attaches is made mandatory, especially in countries like this, which are literally like pumping in literally half our forex earnings are coming in from these Gulf countries?
Okay, now it's like this, you know, now let's learn the lesson from the tragedy. It is necessary to make sure that where our workers are put up, the safety norms are respected. For example, in this case, since there was no fire alarm, were there a fire alarm, even people who are sleeping, they would have got up and tried to get out.
Yes.
So, safety norms should be adhered to, and let us request all the governments in the region, diplomatically, without going into the media, to make sure to make a survey and to take consequential action in that regard. And if we have any reservations about taking joint action with other labor exporting countries, okay, then let us persuade bilaterally other countries, Bangladesh, Lanka and others, also to make similar approaches. Because if you don't want to be seen as ganging up
Yes.
against other importing countries, okay, there is merit in that argument.
Right.
We can do that. So that is one thing. Secondly, now I would suggest something a little more radical. A French citizen abroad
Yes.
is entitled to vote,
Right.
but an Indian citizen abroad, unless he or she is on Government of India service, cannot vote.
Right.
Now, let us consider how we can facilitate voting by our citizens abroad.
Okay.
The reason why I am making this suggestion is that once our politicians and therefore our bureaucracy
Right.
know that these poor workers, ABC, Aya, butler, cook,
Right.
bearer,
Yes.
that have a vote, then the politicians will be compelled to take better care of them.
Right.
And it has been argued that in the Gulf monarchies they might resent it. No, I don't think there is any reason to believe that they will resent
Right.
our giving rights to our people. So
Right.
that will be one measure we can consider.
Absolutely great suggestion there, Krishna. If you can get your workers to vote, then there's obviously going to be some kind of pressure on the government to act and be considerate about the conditions that they're working in. You think that's doable, implementable? Will there be traction? That seems to be one of the great suggestions that I've heard in a long time.
I mean, absolutely. We're talking about no less than Ambassador KP Fabian, who's been there, who's spent time over there, who is giving us a suggestion. I mean, think about it. Even for citizens, when they're living in their own country, the biggest protection that they have is the fact that is the vote.
Yes.
They can vote somebody in or vote somebody out, irrespective of which community, which section of society they come from. And here you have workers who just don't go for 1 year or 2 years. I mean, people from Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and other parts of India go to Kuwait, spend decades, if even, working over there. And if they're going to be spending that much time and not getting a vote, how can you expect the local authorities or the local government over there to take better care of them? So it makes perfect logical sense that that vote could be their greatest protector over there where they're working.
Right, great suggestion there, Dr. Zakir Hussain. 9 lakh, almost 1 crore potential voters sitting in the Gulf. If they get voting rights, do you think their life will improve? And all these changes that you're talking about could happen, possibly overnight. You'll have more responsive missions in the Gulf. You'd probably have those labor attaches as well. Has this been discussed in the past?
Yes, it is one of the factors which may produce pressure on the MPs or MLAs of the region. This is a medium-term program, what I think. It must be implemented, and Gulf has been left for this. But what I think that immediate steps which are required is to make bilateral labor agreement in such a way where embassies and the host countries must be equally responsible for any tragedy or casualty like this happens.
Right.
Number one. Number two, our unregulated recruiters, contractors are mostly responsible, and they are stuffing people, cramming people in residential buildings like that.
Right.
I have seen several buildings. You will be terrified. Even the workers, Nepali workers, are not living in India like that in Delhi.
Yes.
The way they are treating. And the only factor which is that the blue collar workers are suffering more. If this kind of tragedy happened to had this kind of tragedy happened to any developed countries like Americans,
oh yes, there would be a public outcry. Yes.
Global outcry.
Right.
The global outcry, because these countries are putting enough pressure on the host countries and the people who are taking their laborers.
Yeah.
To that extent, they consider them better than their own citizens. This is here I find the flexibility of government to handle their workers. They don't treat as their own citizens. This is a very pathetic situation which I have noticed throughout my research career.
Absolutely. Pathetic situation, Dr. Zakir Hussain. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today, but thank you very much for those suggestions, Ambassador Fabian, Dr. Zakir Hussain, Krishna, for the bilateral labor agreements that we need to protect our workers abroad. Let's not forget that they are the ones who are sending back nearly half our overseas remittances of $90 billion. There's almost 1 crore workers out there who need our help, our support, our protection and our care to prevent incidents like Kuwait from ever happening.